This is Dr. Hurd, and today we're going to do the final literary PowerPoint in our British Lit Survey, and that is the modern period, 1901 to present. We currently don't have another technical term for the literary period yet. I'm sure we will pretty soon, as we sort of see how technology and other influences have shifted culture. But for now, I'm going to just combine the modern and postmodern together, do a quick talk for you so you can kind of look at a few of the modern period and pieces, and then you'll be able to finish up and write your final exam. So congrats to getting this far, right? It's been a year. So let's jump in. So the modern period typically runs from 1901 to, around the current, well, postmodernism is somewhere around 1960s, 1970s. At this point, as I said, the Victorian period sort of ran through the middle 1800s. We had a Victorian/Edwardian period that sort of rounded out the 1800s. And so now we are in the modern period. So this is Queen Victoria up here. She has a teeny tiny crown. She loved that little teeny tiny crown. There's like pictures of her in it. And this is her son Edward VII, who inherited the throne on the death of Queen Victoria as the old Victorian glory of England. And as we'll see today, they lost a lot of property at that point during this century. Imperialism is defined as the policy of extending a nation's authority by territorial acquisition, or by the establishment of economic and political hegemony over other nations. So what is hegemony? Well, it's the predominant influence of a state, region, or group over another. Hegemony is not just used in political situations, it's also used in many other situations where we discuss one group being dominant over another group. When it seems to be overwhelmingly dominant, we use the word hegemony. And hegemony usually basically means that, usually the influence is not only distinctive, but can be suppressive, be oppressive to those people. England was typically known as a world power. At one point, it did have the world's largest and most powerful navy, which is how it got all that land to start with, and it controlled a significant portion of the globe. However, as territories began to claim their independence, like us in 1776, we began to lose control. They began to lose control of their empire. Now we have already discussed imperialism at length in 112. During the 17th century, England took control of India and established the East India Company, which monitored trade to and from India and held administrative functions for the British Parliament. Britain's pursuit of world power and its very poor, condescending treatment of natives we saw in Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad that we read in 112. And there's also a really good depiction. When I say good, I mean the depiction is good, not the treatment. In A Passage to India by Ian Forster. Ian Forster is a great writer. If you ever get a chance to read some of his stuff, Where Angels Fear to Tread, or Howard's Inn, really good stuff. In 1910, South Africa gains independence from Britain, and then the Union of South Africa is formed. Basically, people started breaking away from the British Empire, and a lot of these pressures ended up sort of catalyzing what we would call the Great War, which is World War I. They had never had a world war at that point, so that's why they called it the Great War, or the War to End All Wars. That's what it was called in the press during the day. Of course, now we know there was a World War II, so that was not the only war. But at the time, if you read like literature during the time, they are all, many people are very fearful that this is the apocalypse, right? This is the war to end all wars. This is the war that God said would happen when the world falls apart, right? And so many people were concerned that this was it. This was apocalypse now, right? Now, what other things were happening during this time? Well, we had Freud and Karl Marx. Karl Marx there with his beard du jour. We've already talked about some with him also because we've studied him when we discussed Marxist theory. Obviously, Marxist theory centers around socioeconomic power and socioeconomic class. Okay, so Freud introduced new ways of viewing dream interpretation, sexuality, and human consciousness, stating that our unconscious typically dictates our actions, while Marx, who created communism, fought for the rights of the working class. And again, there's our terms bourgeois, which is the property-owning class, the capitalist class, and the proletariat, which is the working class, which means that you don't have property and you never make enough money to own property or have anything, really that's your own. So you end up just kind of working to yourself to death to get by, right? When the bourgeois don't have to work at all, they already own everything and they have lots of money and they don't have to worry about it. Whereas the working class, like the characters in Animal Farm, they are never the boss. They want to be the boss, but they never capture the power to do that. Most of Freud's stuff, let me just add as a side note, has kind of been debunked. I mean, it's fun to play with some of his theories, but some of his theories are seriously flawed in how we understand and interpret consciousness now. I mean, his sexuality theories are kind of out in left field. Basically each gender envies each other, and because one can make life and the one has male parts, and it's crazy. It's crazy. I took a couple of psychoanalysis classes. Very odd. So here came the Great War. In 1914, Britain was involved in a treaty with France and Russia, and this treaty opposed Germany and Austria-Hungary. There were two triggers to the World War I. Germany invaded Belgium. Germany's always starting stuff, okay? And then Franz Ferdinand, not the band from the early 2000s, the gentleman with the banging mustache right there in the middle. That's Franz Ferdinand, and he was an Austrian Archduke, and he was murdered, I think during the day, like it was well-known thing. And that one murder sparked the murders of thousands and thousands of men in World War I. Now, World War I did differ some from previous wars because they had some new instruments. So there was biological warfare, which is poison gas. We're going to read a couple of poems, one of the poems that talks about the use of poison gas from a soldier's point of view. The trench strategies, and airplanes. Airplanes were first used in World War I as weapons. The trench strategies, if you don't know, trenches are right there on the top of your picture montage there. A trench is basically a small, like a small little passage that's dug in ground, and so from far off, if you look at it, you see flat land, right? But there can be lines of soldiers, armed soldiers, that can pop up and do that. If you've seen, any war movies, you've probably seen that. And even C.S. Lewis talks about how he was a World War I vet, and C.S. Lewis talks about practicing with a full trench before he actually went to war. So they actually had made a trench, and he was practicing how to maneuver in a trench before he actually saw action in battle later. So the Allied powers, which are France, Russia, UK, Italy, and the United States, fought a long, bloody battle with the Central Powers, which at this time was Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire, or Turkey. After the last shot was fired, a total of 9 million casualties were reported. That's all countries. And it ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. So yes, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, and that essentially ended the bullets. That ended the war at the time. But as we will see, there were mounting tensions, which basically crescendoed into World War II, because there was some unfinished business. So between 1914 and 1918, Great Britain lost 750,000 young men. And at that point, they realized we're just a country now, we're not a superpower. Nothing wrong with that. Now, what was happening in literature, though, at the time? The focus changed from concern with society to a focus on introspection. So Virginia Woolf, who's right here on the right side, was a female British novelist and shifted the chronological order of a storyline and created the stream of consciousness, a method of storytelling that dissects the psyche and emotions of a character. Stream of consciousness is typically where we know exactly everything that hits the head of that person from minute to minute, no matter what they think. There have been some, even recently, some literary experiments. I was thinking of Duck's Newburyport, which is a book that garnered a lot of attention last year. The book is, 800 or 900 pages, and it's a stream of consciousness. Okay, a stream of consciousness. So, literally, when you read it, it's the woman being like, I need to take the pie out of the oven, the TV's on, I really like the show, I was thinking about this. Literally, it's like she for 900 pages, jumping and jumping and jumping to all these different thought patterns. Also, we saw James Joyce do this with Ulysses, which is also a book you might want to carry around if you ever get attacked. It's a large book, and it parallels Homer's Odyssey, but it takes place in one day, the whole book, and it's a pretty thick book. So the stream of consciousness really allowed people to kind of go into the brains of these people, these writers and these characters. In the meantime, D.H. Lawrence wrote to express discontent with British society and the world-class system, with industrialism, militarism, which is huge in a time of war, and prudery. I think that's supposed to be prudery. My bad. He actually penned the novel Lady Chatterley's Lover. Very scandalous. It was, like it says here, it was actually banned until 1960. Now it's available in, the classic section of the local Barnes and Noble and Books A Million. But you will blush when you read it. So read at your own risk. You've been warned. But it is very salacious. Okay. And he basically did this as a pushback, and you'll see some of these people were sort of pushing back against the Christian tradition, which was already waning at this point. It started waning in the Victorian period with sort of the uprise of science. But these folks, some of them were really still pushing the envelope. One of the most influential writers right there in the middle is James Joyce, and he wrote about his native country of Ireland. Although Ireland, working to free itself from the grip of England, had fought many bloody battles for its independence. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But, James Joyce, the guy who made me an English major, literally. His book, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, made me an English major in college. That was, for me, the ticket. So, great writer. I have much respect for him always. As we have seen, people who write did go to war. Again, J.R.R. Tolkien, he was a language specialist, so he worked, with like decoding things and stuff during World War I. T.S. Eliot, C.S. Lewis, Siegfried Sassoon, and Wilfred Owen were all poets and writers that went to war during World War I. Many were scarred by their experiences during war and wrote morbid and cynical literature reflecting their time in combat. Yes, absolutely. We call these folks the lost generation. And that is why we call them the lost generation, is because when they came out of war, if they came out at all, a lot of their stuff was very dark and deep and depressing, for lack of a better adjective, because of the things they saw. And it changed them, it transformed them. So we call these guys the lost generation. There was, because imperialism was sort of loosening at that point too, a lot of the British veterans and writers really did lose a lot of their sort of national pride over watching things slip away. Now, we are going to read Sassoon and Wilfred Owen, both great writers, great poets. And I was speaking a minute ago about Ireland, excuse me. And Ireland has, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this course, Ireland and England have kind of always been pushing each other around, which is why when you go to Ireland, half of it, uses British pounds, and the other half uses the euro. It's because they literally had to sort of, split off from each other. So why were all these things happening, and how did they come about? Britain always felt like Ireland was their little brother. If you go back and read some of the writing about Ireland during the Victorian period, they basically insult the Irish people. I think one writer called them apes or something. I mean, they were incredibly disrespectful. They kind of just, like a lot of people look on, Appalachia as a sort of backward and, place. Of course, they do that out of ignorance because they don't know how great and awesome we are. But England kind of treated Ireland the same way, right? Those are our, country cousins, they're kind of uneducated, they drink a lot, So when Ireland finally did want to sort of break apart, and again, this was something that they were pushing for a long time. Even in C.S. Lewis's day, they were, they were fighting over, which is better, Catholics or Protestants. And so in Easter 1916, a group of Irishmen assembled at the Dublin post office and made a declaration of independence, read by Pierce. And against Britain. Basically, if you see on the bottom picture there, I've actually been to Dublin and to that post office. I've been there and in that post office, and it was crazy because they literally took James Connolly, who was the leader of the Irish gang and the Irish group, and sat him in a chair, tied him to a chair, and shot him in the street in front of everybody. So when I went to Dublin, the last time, I've actually been twice, I was there in the street thinking about, wow, wouldn't it be crazy if you just pulled a chair out in the middle of the street and had done this? I mean, how awful would this be for everybody to watch? They were, of course, making an example of him, but those streets have seen a lot of history and a lot of action, and unfortunately a lot of tragedy too. And they eventually they did win their independence, because now they are separate from Great Britain. But it was a long fought battle for them. Of course, after World War I, we have the rise of dictators. The Axis powers all had terrible leaders. And when I say terrible leaders, I mean they were just terrible humans. They were, by definition of leadership, they were probably really good leaders to make people do awful, terrible, horrific things. But, of course, we had dictators which include Mussolini, Lenin and Stalin, and Hitler. So Mussolini was Italy, Lenin and Stalin were Russia, and Hitler, of course, was Germany. So this is Mussolini. He came to power in 1922. He persuaded the public through a form of totalitarian government called fascism. That word is still thrown around a lot, but in more exaggerated cases. Fascism is absolutely and unapologetically awful for the people who are involved in it. Fascism powers through nationalistic emotions, swaying people to follow good dictators followers. Sorry, why did I put good in there? I think because that's all good of the country. My eyeballs are reading ahead. So they're not good dictators. That's an oxymoron. But they're swaying people to follow dictators for the good of the country. Again, it is it's this idea that you would forfeit your own personal beliefs and freedoms for the good of the country. But what does that do? As we see in works like Orwell wrote, like Animal Farm in 1984, when you start surrendering your personal identity, bad things can happen. People can abuse and exploit you through that. Speaking of other dictators, this is Karl Marx. We talked about a minute ago, Karl Marx, the guy with the beard, right, who wrote about communism. Now, in the 1920s, this is Lenin. Lenin is the baldish guy there, and there's his statue there. He structured a society without class in which the state would distribute the country's wealth among the people. However, this was merely propaganda. All it does is that people give you everything, right? And then you can distribute it how you like. So, as you've probably seen this before, I actually tried a few years ago in class. I made this country called Herdia when I was teaching Animal Farm. And I had everybody put their backpacks in the middle of the classroom, and so it belonged to everybody, right? And so I had a kid say, "Well, I need a pencil." So I said, "Well, since all of these backpacks belong to everyone, I'll just take a pencil out of a random backpack, right?" And I didn't actually. I gave them the pencil. I wasn't going to get in trouble for like rummaging through students' backpacks. But, I jokingly, acted like I was, and this one kid's like, "No, that's my backpack." No, he can't have my pencil, right? And this is sort of the principle that applied at large. If I'm the one that's handling everything, then I can choose what to give and who to give it to, right? That obviously is a terrible recipe for prejudice, right? And nepotism. So, he gave all of his buddies, great perks, and then told everybody else too bad. This type of thinking, it really very similar to laissez-faire thinking in Victorian times, is just like, oh well, I'm in charge. What are you going to do about it? It was oppressive and it limited. It's limiting. And then when Lenin passed away in 1924, Stalin seized power and continued the tyranny of communism. Under Stalin's rule, 15 million people were sent to detention or forced labor camps. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Russians. He sent his own people into detention and forced labor camps and killed a bunch of them. A bunch of his own people. That is insane to wrap your head around. And if I remember correctly, the Holocaust killed 11 million people total, which if this is correct, that is more people died in the Russian Revolution period than people who died in the Holocaust. So that's a lot. And that's absolute surrender to ego and control. If you know a little bit about the history, Stalin won, and he was up against a guy named Trotsky. Trotsky lost, but Trotsky still had a lot of loyalists, and Trotsky moved out of the country, moved to Mexico, and Stalin still sent an assassin to go and kill him like 4 years later. And then even in the papers, he was still being blamed for things, even when he wasn't even in the country. But, the papers were still blaming Trotsky for all of these problems, when no, it was Stalin making all these problems and then sort of blaming it on this other guy. And he was dead, and he was still, getting published in the paper as this enemy of the people. So Hitler, I don't know if some people know this, but he was a painter. I actually included one of his paintings there. I mean, not too bad. I mean, I I wouldn't be calling up, The Joy of Painting, even though Bob Ross, isn't alive to do that great show anymore. It's okay. It's not I might buy it at Hobby Lobby. I wouldn't buy it because Hitler did it. But I don't know. You can sell a lot of things, at Michael's. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, so he was a painter. He actually failed twice the entrance exam into the Arts Institute. Failed it twice. So instead, he just determined he was going to be a vindictive world leader, I guess. So that's plan B, right? So what happened is he was a soldier. We have pictures of him as a soldier in World War One. He was, and what's crazy is he fought alongside Jews in World War One and then killed some of them, right, in World War Two, his own people. So he sort of became a revolutionary after, sort of not going the art school route. Wrote a biography called Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle, and then started the Nazi Party, which is National Socialist Party. They won in 1932, and then he didn't waste any time. In 1933, he established Dachau, which is the first concentration camp. And he eliminated Jewish and disenfranchised people from Germany. If you did not match his, Aryan ideal, blonde hair, blue eyes, all that stuff, you were usually sent to your demise. The plan he used was called the Final Solution, and he martyred more than 6 million Jews. 6 million Jews. We're not talking, when I talk about the whole of the Holocaust as far as people who passed, we had gypsies and Poles and homosexuals, and we had and mentally and physically handicapped. He killed a lot of people. So just the 6 million is just Jews. That doesn't include everybody else. So how did World War II end? We dropped a bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I've actually seen that. When I was a kid, I remember seeing the Enola Gay hanging in the museum in Washington, D.C. And, I didn't understand at the time what the, deep historical significance of that plane was. And it was, what caused grave destruction and ended in the war, essentially. If you're at the bottom picture, you can see people who were actually, scarred by burns and chemicals and stuff from the bomb. It was horrible. It was a horrible way to go. It was, and look, again, you probably, if you breathed in some of the chemicals, you could carry them around and eventually die later of cancer. So that ended it. Of course, what we saw later was the Red Scare, right, in the 50s, and as we head into postmodernism, McCarthyism. So what happened was we became super paranoid after we dropped the bomb because we were worried about people dropping them on us. And so that's what started the Red Scare of the 50s. So for postmodernism, I'm going to just hit this real quickly, but global culture ushered in a new era for change. We had the social revolution, women's liberation, the Beatles began to take over the world, the British invasion, and young rebels later demonstrated against politics, and that's current politics, which is Woodstock. Of course, we had Vietnam, and some people were forced to. I had an uncle who went and fought in Vietnam, and didn't always get a lot of the respect he deserved for fighting in that war because it was a very unpopular war. As far as the UK, we had still more Irish fighting over Protestants and Catholics. If you've ever heard the U2 song Bloody Sunday, it's actually written about a specific day that was a peaceful demonstration on January 30th of 1972. The British turned gunfire on 13 protesters, killing all of them. And this picture that you see here is a picture from that day. Ireland's religious landscape holds Catholics, seen as native sons of Ireland, and Protestants under British influence. And this is illustrated on the flag. So this is the Irish flag. It in itself is trying to serve as a symbol for unity, right? Because one flag has the green for the Catholics and the orange for the William of Orange Protestants, the sort of the King Henry VIII, Anglican, way of approaching religion. So they were trying to sort of bring them all together. Again, there's a peace wall there in Belfast that you can see and sign. I've had students sign it. That was built to sort of symbolize, bringing people, understanding. Yes, we have differences in opinion, but they shouldn't make us want to kill one another. So today we are still living in the postmodern times. Postmodern boasts that it's different animal than its modern predecessor. Encouraging individuality and the avant-garde. Yeah, I mean, I wrote that a few years ago. Now that I've aged some, I can really say that culture is cyclical, really. And so what goes around comes around. And it's interesting to sort of see how, things that I was passionate about 20 years ago, I mean, some people are still very passionate about, but some people in my generation have called awareness to it, which is good. I mean, awareness to things that need to be changed, awareness to all the, so a lot of the isms, awareness to things so that we can pull them out into the light, drag them out into the light in some cases, and fix them and make a better world for all of us. So, I haven't talked about Brexit. That's so new. They're still working with that over in the UK, and I have some friends who are over in the UK who are just now getting their vaccines. That in a nutshell is the literary history that we will have time to cover today, because it's almost time for the end of the semester. So thank you guys for coming on this journey with me. It's been fun, and I hope to see you guys very soon. Bye.